Can you tell me how you met? Where it all started?
I started working for him in '93 when he appointed me as assistant secretary in his office, in charge of the legislative office. Then later, he designated me an undersecretary, heading the same office, and I also was appointed as a director of the Manila Economic
Eco.
and Cultural
Meco.
Office,
Okay.
MECO, and then I also headed a number of investigating committee during his administration,
Talaga.
investigating issues on some projects or issues against some government officials.
Oh,
Yan.
that's because you're a lawyer by no
Yes,
by training
that's
or
right.
profession. Oh, but how did you meet? I mean, how did you? I mean, he
Before-
wouldn't appoint you if you weren't in his radar.
Before he even filed his candidacy, I was doing some legal work for him and the family. Small legal works related to business activities of some of the children, etc.
So you were a private lawyer for
Yes.
for so that's where it all started.
Yes.
Okay. Now that we have that, now that we have that settled, first impressions. I mean, what he was still in the military at the time, or was he already Secretary
Yes,
of
he
Defense?
was Vice Chief of Staff at that time.
So pre-EDSA pa ito, sir?
Yeah, Vice Fabian Ber. Yeah, and then during the COVID time, as Secretary of National Defense.
Wow. So mahaba-haba pa pala ang
Well,
inyong-
I was trying to calculate it would be about more than 2 decades. Because after his presidency in '98, he asked me to stay on to help him organize this foundation, which he would like to have to continue his
his work.
unending work. So
Unending.
I stayed for another so many years.
I'll get to the unending work.
That's right.
Part of it later. But give me your first impressions of then Vice Chief of Staff General Ramos.
Well, at that time, you will already...
Wala pang EDSA nun, no?
Wala pa.
Oo. But so what was his reputation? What did you know of him, preconceived?
Well, it was more at that time at a personal, not yet official level. So, he is a fine gentleman, a good golfer, a thinker, and a voracious reader, and a worker.
Worker. Okay, so let's get into that. People have told us that it's a terrific work ethic that he has.
Yeah, because he is the only guy I know whose car has a little desk full of documents and papers where he worked even during travels.
So moving from one point to another.
Yeah, he works.
So that's literally it's a mobile office.
That's right. Even during his presidency, you can only see his presidential car. Yeah, it is equipped with practically office equipment. A little desk, folders, pens,
So walang
et cetera.
sayang. Walang sayang na
Yeah.
oras. No? Walang sayang na oras. Oh my, di ba? What of the campaign? Did you help out with the campaign?
No, I was not an active campaigner. I was not really into politics, and I was not quite involved in the campaign.
And you'd really much rather keep away from it than get into it?
That's right.
Okay. But you did get into it. I mean, you eventually got
Well,
appointed
eventually,
into
when he became president, then
Why a year later, hindi ka pa ba, ano? Weren't you being
I was,
convinced to...
at that time, I just organized my own law firm.
Okay.
And I was still trying to settle things with my partner at
Partners.
the time.
So that's why 93 ka
Yeah,
on board.
early 93, I think.
Oh, okay. Okay. But that's a cost. I mean, the cost of you working for him, with him, officially as part of his administration, as against a, shall we say, more financially financially rewarding law practice.
Well,
Why did you get
I
it?
would say the honor of being able to work with him is unquantifiable. You cannot compare that with monetary considerations.
Oo nga, no? Iba yung I work for the president.
Yeah, being able to be part of his team is an honor enough.
So, yung ano, you told me you had at least 2 key focus areas. Deputy Executive Secretary for
Legislative office.
The legislative. How does that differ
Because
from the EPLN?
one of the main focus of his administration early on is to come up with economic and structural reform laws. Because without these laws, his development program will be difficult to implement. So he needed a legislative office to take care of organizing his legislative program and implementing through a good relationship with the both houses of Congress.
Yeah, actually, that was a very challenging challenging job.
To just give you an idea, at the time when he came in to office, we are, as you will recall, suffering from 6-hour brownouts. We do not have telephone lines. As Lee Kuan Yew have joked, you know that old joke. 90% of the people are waiting for a telephone line, and the other 10% are waiting for a dial tone.
Okay.
So what he had in mind was to liberalize our telecommunication system, to liberalize our banking system, to liberalize our energy or power sector. All these needed special laws to address these requirements.
Ano rin, no? I'm looking at his background as well, manager and also as an engineer. He liked building, you know?
Yes.
So this office was non-existent before he came in.
I really am not familiar with how the former administrations set up, but I am inclined to believe that there is none, because their legislative programs are not quite active, and I must say not quite successful as he is.
Not as
His administration, if you might have heard it, has successfully passed 229 important economic reform, social reform laws. I think no other administration has done that, and would probably be very difficult to surpass.
It was a very robust legislative agenda. No?
That's right.
And again, I guess it was also the mark of his leadership that, you know, you can't move forward without a plan and the vision. Tell me how you might want to share a few vignettes about how you manage the difficult personalities in both houses of Congress.
In his case, he availed of that very, very important mechanism. You must have heard of it, called the LEDAC, the Legislative Executive Development Advisory Council. Because of that LEDAC, he is able to convene leaders of Congress. In fact, that is weekly. He convinced them weekly, the leaders of Congress and other congressmen, leaders from the private sector, members of the cabinet, where they discuss what we need, what are the most urgent, what are the problems, and everything is resolved during that weekly meetings over simple breakfast.
Weekly, ano? Oh, yeah.
Weekly. That is why he is able to come up with legislations that are supported by both houses of Congress.
Yeah, so you already said that it's like a management tool, that enables, but at the same time, it's also, I guess, a consensus building
That's right.
mechanism.
That's right. Well, one of perhaps I can share with you, whenever a senator would celebrate his birthday, he would invite the senator to a golf game, a night golf game at the Malacanang golf course, and talk about many things.
Tactics,
And that is also a very good way of fostering close relationship with the senators on a very personal level at that.
Yeah. Captured audience for
Yes.
what? Maybe
5
about
hours.
4 or 5 hours. You're a golfer too, I presume?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I saw your name on the. there's a poster here that says.
One of my jobs, in fact, in this foundation used to be to organize a game for him every Wednesday or during weekends. At the time when he was still a very avid player.
But he generally used any and all, I guess, resources available on hand. I mean, a golf game.
That's right.
A birthday, a birthday celebration.
Yeah.
Coffee, I guess.
That's correct. Even when he was, I recall when he was appointed as a member of the eminent persons group that drafted the ASEAN Charter. He would engage the ministers of ASEAN countries in a golf game. And before the golf game ends, they are able to resolve many of the difficult issues that came out in the drafting of the charter.
How did he prepare for these? I mean, I guess you one time or another helped prepare some of these briefing papers for him. Tell me how he prepared for
He would need
these engagements.
very little help because, as you know, his habit is every day he clips about the news coming from about 10 or 12 newspapers. So he practically know what is happening in the country, outside the country, on practically all subjects, politics, economy, etc.
Yeah, I've heard stories about those clippings, and that he'd normally have them in his hands by excuse me, about 4:15, 4:30.
That's right. He instructs his aides to procure all major dailies, about 12 of them, every day at 4 a.m. from the marketplace. And that should be on his table by 4:30, and at 4:30 he starts going over these papers and clips information or news or comments on almost all subjects.
Ano yun, sir? Clip na yun, ano? And then subject matter
Every
categorized.
folder has a subject. So if he needs to go back and need some reference material on a particular subject, he will get, let's say the subject is power. Then he will pull out the folders on power and he will have the information that he needs. To give you an idea of how this went, his basement is probably filled with more than 50 filing cabinets, all bursting to the seams, with many on the floors even, containing these clippings.
Ano yung clippings from the years that he was, he
Yes,
was in the...
because at that time, as you know, we don't have computers and these high-tech record-keeping gadgets. So he did it on a mano-mano basis.
And physical storage.
That's
talaga,
right.
ano? Oh,
I suppose those are still existing to this date.
Okay, that's 4:15, 4:30 maybe. I also heard that drawing from those clippings, he would start making calls at about 5 o'clock to about 6 o'clock. Now, since you were focused on getting legislation up and running, passed, enacted, were you a recipient of any of these morning calls?
Oh yes,
Were you a
many.
regular?
Practically, in my case, I received photocopies of clippings with instructions. Is red pen instructions requiring you to do certain things and give a feedback with the note NLT, not later than such and such a date. You have to provide him a feedback. If he wants a research, a study, or consultation with people, then that has to be given back to him on a certain date. And mind you, he keeps track of your NLT. Yeah, if you are unable to deliver that, his assistant will call you and ask for your feedback, whose deadline fell, let's say, on that date.
Talaga?
Yeah,
So-
it's not just putting a deadline. He keeps track of the deadline you are supposed to meet. Yeah.
So, what happens if you don't meet?
Well, of course, by and large, people would meet the deadline by
Comply.
hook or by crook.
Oh.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Otherwise, wala naman. But you are duty bound to do that.
walang bowling out.
Sometimes.
Naka-experience ka ba?
In my case, no.
Talaga?
I'm not,
Okay. But he was really a very stickler for detail and tell me about, were you also bitten by the CSW bug?
Oh yes, of course. Everybody gets that. Everybody gets that.
Tell me about how that impacted on you.
Well,
Completed staff work.
it's I think it is one of the most effective way in his entire 6 years of administration, because that would require you to analyze, to anticipate all issues on a particular subject. And if there are problems, to suggest how you can solve or address the problem. And you need to coordinate with all other people concerned or agencies concerned. For example, to make it a more concrete picture, let's say when he was about to adopt the policy on liberalizing the banking industry. So if you were given a CSW mandate on that, first of all, you have to get the feedback. You have to give a copy of the proposal and get a feedback from all parties concerned, namely the central bank, the Department of Finance, the Department of Trade.
So hindi pwedeng lone wolf.
No, hindi. The essence of CSW is coordination and discussion. So you have to get the feedback and of all these agencies, even the private sector. You have to, in that example, you have to go to the Bankers Association of the Philippines, the business groups, the Management Association of the Philippines, and even the labor groups. So that in the end, the person collating all these discussions will have a complete picture. And all issues and all grounds would have been fully covered. So when it has to be accompanied by a recommendation. So by the time the paper reaches him on his table, he would have all the inputs, information necessary. And therefore, invariably, he comes up with a very well-informed, intelligent, and correct decision. Because how else can you be wrong? If you have the feedback and opinion and analysis from all sectors concerned.
That was very much like him, ano? That's also part of his background as intelligence.
Intelligence, I heard from what I read somewhere, the only guy who did not agree in that type of style of governance is Bono Adasa.
Bono, why so?
He said that when a leader makes decision, he doesn't have to get feedback from people. He can do it based on the stock knowledge that he has.
But that's not FVR.
But that is not really correct because, one, it assumes that you have stock knowledge. You cannot claim knowledge in all fields on earth. There may be some areas where you are an expert, but definitely there are areas where you are not.
And that's why
his premise there would be totally wrong. Anyway, he is the only guy I know of who said that.
Now, the other thing about CSW is that every stakeholder has got to have a buy-in. No, they have to be engaged in.
That's right. In fact, the more inputs you have, the better, because you are able to anticipate all probable commentaries or probable issues or problems on a particular subject.
Now you're talking about the banking law. I guess this was the legislation for the new Banco Central.
No, it was in fact the legislation for the liberalization
of the banking industry.
So that law practically allowed 10 new foreign banks to operate in the Philippines, and therefore enhanced constructive competition among banks, and in the end, better deal for our banking public.
Better services. More competition.
That's right.
And that basically applies to just about every other sector that was
correct
lined up for liberalization.
More so, let's say, on the liberalization of telecommunications.
Yeah, actually, nabanggit mo na yan. But which particular legislative piece stands out with you? You've mentioned banking, you've mentioned telecoms. Or are those the ones that
the energy sector and the transportation sector? Those are the pillars practically of where his economic program was anchored.
That ties up with people empowerment, yung the sectors were just controlled by monopolies
That's right.
and
Yeah,
cartels.
yeah.
Ano?
If you remember his battle
He
cry,
didn't like that. Ano?
no, in fact, that was among his priority legislations that he took up with Congress. The liberalization of almost all major sectors of the economy.
Yeah, you were going to mention his battle cry. I'm sorry, I cut you.
Well,
there.
it was Philippines 2000, which many people initially did not understand, but it was based on two main goals, which is, as you noted, people empowerment and global competitiveness. So these two you cannot achieve without those important pieces of legislation. If you do not have a vibrant banking system, how can you compete? If you do not have an adequate telecommunication system, how can people work efficiently and compete?
Literally lahat no? Shipping, aviation,
Lahat yan.
banking, financial
Lalo na yung
institutions.
one of the most important was the BOT laws, the build, operate, and transfer. Because without funds, we cannot build the basic infrastructure that we need. And it was through this BOT law that we were able to build important infrastructure,
Build
the roads, the bridges,
the expressways.
expressways. Yeah.
Oo.
These things started with that BOT laws, which was later expanded to the so-called expanded BOT law.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then different permutations, ano? Build, lease, transfer,
Yeah.
build, own, operate.
It contained so many possible combinations.
Again, that probably needed the mind of both a manager and an engineer.
Yeah, being the engineer that he is, then that falls seamlessly so far as he is concerned.
Yeah, you're right, ano? Because infrastructure was, the level of infrastructure at the time that he came in was just terrible.
That's right.
Oh.
If you will recall this network of C5, C4, C6 was planned and conceptualized by him.
during his
How to interconnect the entire country.
And he had a way of flipping the coin. So the wrong side of the coin was you don't have infrastructure. Philippines, you don't have infrastructure. He flipped it aside. He flipped it and sent it back to the business community and said, so let's invest. And instead of them keeping away, it brought them
In.
in.
Yeah. I think that was the model that brought us our major airports.
Sayang, hindi nagagamit masyado ngayon. Tell me about the assignment at MECO.
Well, MECO is just our mechanism to engage or pursue our relationship with Taiwan. As you know, because of
We're strapped there, ano?
a joint communique signed by Marcos years ago, the People's Republic of China required us to recognize PROC as the only China, and that we cannot maintain any political or official relationship with Taiwan, whom they claim is just a province of
Rebel province.
of Taiwan, of PROC.
So we were banned from conducting official
That's right.
relations politically. But
In other words, let's say you cannot invite a Taiwanese president or a Taiwanese minister to come in, and vice versa. You cannot send a cabinet member to Taiwan or any government official to Taiwan.
parang tightrope yata yung...
So the mandate of MECO is to maintain a so-called people-to-people relationship, cultural relationship, economic relationship, all types of relationship except political. So
foreign
that's
relations.
how we did that.
And that was crucial, because you take a look at a lot of the light industrial, the economic zones that were being set up, and more often than not, there was always a major Taiwanese
That's correct. Yes.
locator.
Yes. So we really have to maintain a very good and strong relationship with Taiwan, notwithstanding the restrictions imposed upon us by this.
So ano yung
China.
ano yung naging instruction si FVR for that, for
Well,
your
as you know,
assignment?
this relationship with Taiwan is very important, and I think personally close to him because his father, Ambassador Narciso Ramos, stayed in Taiwan for many years. In fact, he was he cultivated the Philippine relationship with Taiwan for many years. So it was probably a subject that is dear and close to him. So his,
Personal din.
I would say a touch of being personal.
Yan.
So
Parang nasabi.
yeah, his father is a very well respected and beloved figure in Taiwan. So his instruction was simply to strengthen our relationship with Taiwan.
And true enough, no? Not, ang daming...
Oh yes.
Ang daming locators
To
na.
begin with, we have thousands of factory workers in Taiwan, not domestics, but workers in big factories.
Pinoys.
Pinoys. There are a lot of Pinoys earning good money and being treated quite well.
These are blue collars.
Yes, that's right. Blue collars. And they are one of the earliest responders. If there are calamities in the Philippines, Taiwan is among the first, and in fact, sometimes the biggest aid providers. And, well, our cultural relationship with them is quite good.
Which goes far back.
Yes. In fact, during our, after his presidency, we organized a group of businessmen going to Taiwan every year to play the RP Taiwan Golf Friendship Golf Tournament. It is composed of some 20 or 50 Filipino businessmen. We have a counterpart of 50 Taiwanese businessmen who meet together and do some networking and exchange of
Play golf.
yes.
And end up with a business agreement
That's
at
right.
the end of the...
That was a very good and successful way.
Again, there's something about golf that it's just with golfers lang talaga. You mentioned it, were there any special missions, assignments where political
Not my area. Not my area.
okay.
Because even in the pursuit of his legislative agenda, he would have people who are in charge with liaisoning with the Congress and with the Senate. I think during his time, it was Lumawig,
The PLLO, you mean?
PLLO, and then for the Senate, it was Ching Montinola,
Yeah.
who was doing the PR work.
Yeah, sila yung ground, arms and legs.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. No, but what I meant was, I remember kasi there were at least one or two incidents where a Taiwanese minister dropped by, was it Subic or was it
Oh no, it's not minister, it's president.
There you are.
It was President
And that
Lee
caused some
Teng-hui.
trouble with Beijing, right?
Yes, it was President Lee Teng-hui, but the cover at that time was simply that he is en route to, I think, Singapore, and he just stayed for a few hours in Subic.
But it was enough time for him to meet.
Yes, they met and had about an hour
Discussions.
worth of talk,
Yeah.
which was, I suppose, very fruitful. But it was not considered a visit to Manila, but just a stopover, so to speak. So
Okay.
the violation, if at all, of the China-Philippine communique is not very clear, to say the least.
Semantics.
Uh,
Okay din. Na-finesse. Yeah, because at first it was hush-hush and then eventually word came out that
yeah, the Chinese are very good at...
initially some denials. But
That's right.
yeah. Okay. So you stayed on up to 98?
98.
Oo.
That's
Oo,
right.
oo.
And after 98, he asked me to stay to
And
organize
Tuloy-tuloy na.
Yes.
Tell me about
this foundation.
Why?
Well, even before his term ended, he already discussed that immediately after his term, he want to have a foundation.
Pag-usapan na ninyo?
Yes, that would not do the normal or ordinary run-of-the-mill foundations, what they do, such as giving scholarships, giving assistance to people. What he envisioned was a foundation that would enable him to continue his work, focused on people empowerment still, environment, economic diplomacy, poverty reduction, etc.
He wasn't exactly looking at retiring at all, the way you're saying it.
I don't think so. He was in fact envisioning a busier work schedule. At that time, after his presidency, he was, for example, going abroad during the early months after retirement, about 2 or 3 times a month. Speaking engagement, attending conferences, visiting foreign heads of state.
So no let up.
Oh yes.
Ganun pa rin.
Oo.
But this time, I guess, ikaw na yung kasama.
Well, I probably accompanied him in almost 100 of these foreign visits.
Oh my gosh. You were the first executive director.
No, after his presidency, it was Amy Bongkodin.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, the former budget secretary. But she was asked by GMA, I think, to be her DBM secretary. So I took over.
When did you take over?
Well, just probably barely a year after after
99?
Emmy. But I was already here with him.
But you helped set it up,
Yes.
di ba? So I guess you also
Well,
you
even
prepared the
even
foundation papers.
that's right. Even before his term ended, we were already starting to work on the foundation's charter. And he instructed me to have it approved by General Almonte.
Pina-check niya kaya.
Yes, to get his inputs and approval, which we got. I think, in fact, he was the one who suggested the name.
RPDEV.
RPDEV.
Si Joel?
Yes. Two of them, maybe,
Yeah, yeah.
over coffee.
Not brandy. But it's actually it's more like a presidential center. It's a library, di ba? Among others.
Yes, he constructed in Alabang what he called the museum. It is where all his mementos during his presidency are housed. His books and what I mentioned earlier, his files, his voluminous clippings and files are there.
Were you able to accompany him? So you accompanied him on trips post-presidency. What about during his presidency?
One or two.
No, the reason I'm asking you is I want you to make a comparison as to how he was working then and how he was working.
Well, at that time, probably one of the bigger difference is at that time he can call on many assistants. He would be accompanied by cabinet members and people from the private sector. So there are many people who could attend to his requirements. Now, after that, there's only the two of you.
So it fell on your shoulders.
It's not a difficult one because he would even carry his own luggage
Sundalo
if
ito.
necessary. Yes.
Oh. So, but the pace, you're saying, did not...
Oh, no. It's very difficult still to catch up with him.
Talaga.
There was, I remember one time where we flew from Manila to New York. That's about 18 to 20 hours of flight.
Yeah.
And then when we deplaned, we rode on a car and played golf.
Oh my.
Because he was attending, he was a guest of honor in an annual golf tournament, LPGA, sponsored by a big IT company in New York. And he is one of the guest of honor along with other former leaders and ministers. So I remember the moment we landed, he proceeded to the golf course and played.
And you were...
I had to walk with him.
You had to play with him too?
Sometimes.
Okay. Okay. Oh my. So, ano talaga, ano? But, as you said, the reception was just as warm.
Oh,
It
yes.
was just,
Even more so because at this time he is no longer surrounded by security people. So he can engage people more closely and more personally.
But he was also much sought after dahil, I guess, when you're done with your term, you're considered, you join that club of senior statesmen.
Yes,
You assume senior
they used to
statesman.
have many groups. Former President Clinton, former Australian ministers, former English, British Prime Minister, Japanese Prime Minister. They used to have a group that does regular lectures
Sharing
to share
their-
their experience and best practices. They even had one of the best group that he had was the so-called Club de Madrid. It is a group of former presidents from about 5 countries. Their job is to help troubled leaders or troubled countries to restore their democratic processes.
Wow.
One of these was during the crisis in the civil war in East Timor, which was practically paralyzed because of the rebel group and the divided leadership in the country. So after at that time they just finished their first democratic elections, and they flew in and stayed there for many days to help the newly elected president Ramos to strengthen his democratic structures and help them normalize their processes.
Advice from no?
And
Senior
mind you,
leaders
for example, there was a time when 2 weeks after we went there, Horta was ambushed
Oh, nga, no?
by the rebels. He sustained several chest wounds, but miraculously he survived.
Yeah. Nandun kayo, no?
Yeah, 2 weeks before. The same is true in Bangladesh. When we visited Bangladesh, well, at that time we were given a truckload of security people because of the civil unrest. And then 1 month after, the Prime Minister then, the lady Prime Minister, was ambushed again. That's the areas where he went to provide a helping hand to these leaders.
Struggling democracies.
The struggling democracies or those which are confronted with problems, rebellion, and other similar problems.
And he has quite a trove of advice that he can
Oh yes,
give,
he was able to give, I'm sure.
What do you share most with people about your having worked with FVR? What it's like to work for him?
Well, it was a combination of challenge and privilege. A privilege to work for someone you admire, and a challenge because it was not an easy task. For
Both sides of
example,
it.
after his presidency, you will recall that he was the target of the opposing political parties. Most often, if they have their own shortcomings, they will turn to FBR to deflect the focus on them and then try to attack his policies, his programs, and his projects.
Yeah.
So that was the difficulty then was if you are no longer in position or power, you won't have access to records, to working papers and documents to defend your position. For example, let's say the AFP Modernization Fund.
Yeah. Yeah.
You must have read that many, many times. Many columnists and many politicians would say that the 8 billion worth of AFP Modernization Fund vanished in thin air, cannot be accounted for.
Yeah.
So, of course, we know that that is not true. We know where the funds are. We know how it was handled. But it is one thing to know and another thing to prove. So how do we prove our position? If we can no longer access our records and our working papers in the appropriate offices. So that was the challenge.
That was just one among a few, right?
Yes.
Centennial,
Peya Amari, Smoky Mountain.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
but in typical FBR fashion,
well,
he rolled
we
with
have
the
two
punches,
things going for us. One is, as I've said, his phenomenal filing system. So even if we do not have access to the records in the offices concerned, we have access to his very extensive and complete files on the issue. And second, his equally phenomenal memory. Yeah. He is able to recall in amazing accuracy and detail the many aspects of this transaction. So with that, we are able to start working on our position.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, as I said, he rolled with the punches, and eventually they just died down.
No, we had to answer that, and we were able to refute each and every one of them.
Right.
For example, in the Modernization Fund, where they say that the fund vanished in thin air, eventually we were able to procure copies of the acknowledgement receipt issued by the Bureau of Treasury saying that the fund was received by the Bureau of Treasury.
Right, right.
We were also able to come up with budget releases signed by Benjamin Jokno, who was the DBM Secretary of ERA,
at the time,
showing that he released certain funds from the AFP Modernization Fund.
So hindi
Which means that it is not
Yeah.
unaccounted for, or it did not vanish. And finally, we found the report of Davide. It's so-called the Davide report, which said that the AFP Modernization Fund was intact at the time Ramos ended his administration.
And he appeared before this.
Oh yes,
several
he is not one
congressional-
to back out or back out from this type of challenges. He would sometimes even volunteer, if you want, I will appear. Because he knows that his position is solid and can be defended. For example, in the Smoky Mountain case, people said that it is an anomalous, questionable, improper transaction. Miriam Defensor Santiago initiated a Senate investigation. Anyway, we were able to answer all her questions.
Yeah. That eventually
that
died
shut
down,
her
right?
up.
Yeah.
But that was not the end of it. Another crusading, quote unquote, lawyer brought up a case in the Supreme Court questioning the same transaction.
The Smoky Mountain.
Yes, but eventually the Supreme Court ruled that it is regular, no irregularities involved. Everything was proper. And the decision is not an ordinary decision. It was a unanimous decision made by the Supreme Court, sustaining the legality of the entire project.
I guess that also spoke about FVR as a as a public servant. No, I mean, integrity was honesty.
Oh, yes.
In his dealings were part of the DNA.
That is why he never prohibited any of his cabinet or former cabinet members to appear in any of these investigations. Because he knows that these projects were properly implemented.
You spent 593, up to 98, so 5 years in his administration. Did he have enough time to do everything that he had set forth to do?
Well, I should say he was able to plant the seeds of his vision. Many of them he was able to achieve during the 5-year term. But those that are not yet done can be done because of what he has put in place.
So it's
such as this infrastructure, these laws.
It was for him to start it, and then
Yes, and
someone
then
else to continue.
with the succeeding administration simply following. Unfortunately, instead of following, they tried to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So.
What would you think was his greatest legacy, his greatest contribution as president?
It cannot be. I think it cannot be embodied in a single statement.
Okay.
It is the restoration of respect, self-respect among the people, and fostering competitiveness. You will recall that by the end of his term, or during the last months of his term, we were already being called the rising tiger of Asia, from an economy that is doing a zero growth rate in 92. We were at that status by the time his term ended.
And then you've already said that he opened up,
Yes, these
opened
basic
up.
industries, power, transportation, banking are already there. That's why I don't know if you have heard, it was Joe Almonte who said that after everything he has put in place during his administration, even a monkey can run the country, just following what he put in place.
Pero ka bang most memorable FBR moment mo?
But just a small item.
Okay.
When we went to the States immediately after 9/11,
Oh, okay.
we were supposed to stay in the States for 15 days.
Okay.
So we had provisions for 15 days. That means big suitcases. We have 2 heavy golf bags, and we have about 7 or 8 boxes full of books and materials. And at that time, they were super strict in all airports. We are supposed to visit 5 cities.
Right.
And you have to carry your own luggage. You have to open it. They will inspect it.
Yeah.
Even the golf clubs, you have to pull out all your clubs. And they will put some laser gadget inside the golf bag to make sure that you have no explosive materials.
They were very strict then.
Yes. And I have to do my luggage. He also did his own luggage, putting up 5 heavy boxes,
Yeah.
which he did with humor, with a sense of humor. Just smiling and laughing it up.
He took it.
In stride, yeah. It was just,
And yet he was a former president.
that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.